Welcome to PhotographyBB's Photoshop Artistry Effects. In this tutorial, we're going to look at our brand new Grunge Effects Builder Volume 1 for Photoshop. Let's dive on into Photoshop and see what you can do with this new resource. So after you've downloaded your PhotographyBB Grunge Effects file, you'll want to unzip the file, and you will have a Photoshop document that you can open in Photoshop just like this. Now this resource will allow you to create an almost unlimited number of grunge effects, including a large number of color options and textures that you can use as grunge overlays in your digital artwork. So let's take a look at how to do this. It's a two-step process, and the first step is to create your own grunge overlay that you would like to use, and the second step would be to apply that to one of your images. So first we'll look at how to create a grunge overlay using this resource and what you can do with some of the optional customization options. So once you've opened the file, you'll see something like this appear on your screen. And if you have your layers palette open, you can toggle open the PhotographyBB Grunge Effect Builder folder right here, and you'll find a number of layer groups inside. We're going to go from the top down, except we're going to skip the first one here, lighting and tone control, and I will come back to this one shortly. So the first thing that we're going to do is pick a grunge texture. Now for now, I'm going to turn off the complex gradients and the linear gradients layer groups here. And these contain the different color options that you're seeing on the grunge effect here. So for now, we're going to look at the grunge textures layer subgroup right here. And if we toggle this group open, this group here contains 12 different grunge textures that you can use for creating your grunge overlay. So you can see there's this sort of scratchy one right here. We can turn off the visibility of that one and turn on the visibility of another one. There's this texture here. There's another texture, and you have 12 different options to choose from. Now you'll only want to have one of these textures visible at a time. So I'm just going to go with the first one for the purpose of this example. And if you would like to change the strength of the texture itself, you can adjust the opacity of the grunge textures layer group right here. So if we increase the opacity, you'll see how the texture becomes stronger. Or if you want to decrease the opacity, you can make the texture very subtle as well. So I actually like it a bit stronger than what we had it at. So I'm going to go with 60 instead of 50%. And again, you'll only want to have one of these textures visible. So if you wanted to choose a different one, you'll remove the visibility of this one, and you can pick a different one, like so. Okay, I'll go back to that first one here. So once you've chosen your grunge texture, next we'll look at some of the color options that we have available. So we have these complex gradient color options, and then we have linear gradients as well. Both do the same thing. They're just a variation of how the color is applied over the texture. So first we'll look at the complex gradients, because one of them is currently active right now. That is this one right here. And if you're not particularly fond of the colors that you're seeing here, these can also be adjusted, and I'll show you how to do that. But for now, same as with the grunge textures, you'll only want to have one of these active at a time, or one of these visible at a time. So if you would like to change this gradient to a different one, we remove the visibility of that one, and let's say we wanted something a little warmer. You can go down here, and you'll see it applies the gradient effect to the grunge texture. We can change that again, maybe go with something more colorful here, like this. But for this example, I think I will go with something like this. This is good. Now, if you wanted to, instead of using these complex gradients, actually I'll remove the visibility just for a moment, and we'll go down to the linear gradients instead. And these are similar options, but they're more of a faded linear gradient. So you'll see one color fading into another. These ones are very good for landscape images, you'll find. Like these. So a number of different color options here, 10 options in total. But for this example, I'll close up the linear gradients group, make sure none of them are visible. And I will choose, I think it was this one here, number 6. And now that we've got the texture and the gradient overlay that we like. I'm going to close up the complex gradients layer group. Now we can move back into the lighting and tone control, and this will apply some lighting effects and allow you for some more control over the colors and the richness of the effect as well. So the first layer inside here is sort of a vignette effect, and if I remove it, you'll see what I mean here. Just applies a very subtle darkening around the edges, and if you wanted to make that stronger, you can click on this layer to make it active, and once again increase the opacity to make it stronger, or decrease the opacity to make it more subtle. I actually like how this looks on this gradient, so I'll probably go up to 50%. It was at 20 before. Next we have a noise overlay as well, so we can remove the noise that's currently on there, or we can add in some noise. Makes it a little subtle grainy effect there. And again, if you wanted to increase the strength of that, you can bump up the opacity of this layer, and you'll see that it really brings in noise into the texture. I liked it low, so we'll go back with maybe 10%, a little bit lower. Great. And next we have color controls here. So if you are not particularly fond of these colors, or if you wanted to change them or shift them a little bit or decrease their strength, we can double click on the adjustment layer thumbnail right here. That will bring up the hue saturation adjustments. Now by default, we have sort of muted the colors a little bit. We've decreased the saturation by 20. You can increase it to crank up the intensity of the colors. That can sometimes have a really cool effect for a grunge look. We can really mute them, or even make it black and white if you decrease that all the way to the bottom. I will go with something in the neighborhood of, let's say, -30. And you can also use the hue slider here to shift the tones a little bit if you wanted to have a different type of tone. See how sliding that changes the tones. Oh, I like this kind of rusty look. We'll go with that one right there, maybe around 26, sure. And I might bring the saturation down a little for that one. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so I can close that up. And lastly, we have a contrast control, and this just increases the brights and the darks, basically. So removing that, you can see have a little bit more contrast in the texture, and if you wanted to get very complicated, you can double click on that to adjust the curve, and you can make your own contrast adjustments this way as well. So we'll close that up, and we'll close that layer group. So I'm happy with this, and I want to turn this into a grunge overlay to use in a piece of digital art. All I have to do now is export this file, and I want to export it as a PNG file. They just tend to work really nicely with the grunge overlays, and it maintains the transparency levels of those layers. So to do that, we'll go up to the File menu, we'll go to Export, and I like to use Quick Export as PNG. You could use Export As for more options. And we'll just save this file. I'm just going to save this as Grunge Effects 1, and I'm saving it into a folder called Grunge Textures. That's up to you where you decide to save it. So we'll save that file. And after that file is saved, now we can open a photo in Photoshop, or a piece of digital art that you're working on. So I'm going to use this image here, and I want to apply that grunge overlay now. So what we're going to do is go to File, and Place, or Place Embedded. I'm going to pick that grunge overlay that I just created, and we'll say Place. Okay, and I'm just going to stretch that out. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on a PC, or the Option key on a Mac, and the Shift key as well, and I'm going to grab the side anchor point, and that will stretch it evenly right across to the bounds of the image there, just like that. Let go of the mouse, and you can click Return or Enter twice to set this texture, or you can use the check mark up here. I'll use that. And basically, we are all set now. The magic of overlays is all in the blending mode of the grunge overlay that we're using. Now, I like to use darken or multiply sometimes. Also, screen sometimes works nicely, not with this particular one. Overlay, soft light, or hard light does a nice job. Vivid light sometimes. So you'll have to experiment And it's all depending on the image that you're working with, the underlying image, and also the color strength of the texture or the overlay that you've created. For this one, I happen to like how multiply looks. Yeah, we'll go with multiply. Let's try linear burn. No, we'll go with multiply. And obviously this is a little bit dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease the opacity of that. It's a little strong as well. Maybe we'll go down to 70. I like the way that's starting to look there. And I want to remove some of the overlay from the subject itself, from the car itself. So we can do this by adding a layer mask and painting with a black brush where we want to reveal the original image. So I'm going to hit my brush tool. The default swatch is black, so that's perfect. I'm going to increase the size of the brush here. And what I'll do is I will use a brush opacity of maybe 30% around there, just to start with, and bring back, as I paint, some of the original car right here. Do that again. Now you might want to be a little bit careful on images like this where we've got a window in the car. We still want to see through that window, so I'm just going to be a little careful as I paint around. Now you see I've made a little error there. I'll show you how to correct that as well. Okay, so I think we're looking pretty good. Maybe we'll go back here a little bit. Oop. So I've got a couple of spots that I need to fix, and to do that it's very easy. We're just going to switch the swatches around. So white is the foreground color, and I will paint back over that little area. Oops, I want to increase my brush opacity back up to 100. We'll paint back here. I'll fix that up, yep, and down here as well. Okay, and maybe I want to remove some of the grunge overlay from the foreground here. So what I'll do is I will flip back to a black brush. I'll go with 20% opacity, and I'll increase the brush size quite a bit. And I'll just roughly paint over the foreground, and that kind of brings back that look there. Okay, so I'm really liking the way this looks. I love what the grunge texture's done with the sky here. And again, if we want to really crank that up, we could go, oh yeah, kind of like that actually. Let's go with 85%. And you'll see the original image. I'm holding down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and clicking the layer visibility of the background layer here. And I can see the original image, the grungy new image. Now, one of the things that I encourage everybody to try is click on your grunge overlay and then invert it. So that's Control or Command I to invert it, and just see how the effect looks. So when I invert it, we get something like this. Now, a lot of times when you invert the texture, you'll wind up with something completely unexpected that you may wind up loving. I happen to like how this looks as well. Completely different look, but you can see if I remove the invert or I apply the invert, we have two completely different options now, but both of them look pretty cool, I have to say. So it's up to you. I just encourage you to play around and see the results that you get. So I hope you have a lot of fun using this new builder. There's going to be a ton of options you can do, almost unlimited number of combinations you can come up with. So have a lot of fun experimenting with this and applying them to your images. Thanks again for choosing Photoshop Artistry by PhotographyBB, and happy photoshopping.